Good afternoon. We're here for the last session of the Awake Sleep Apnea meeting. And in this session, we want to focus on some of the barriers, both to diagnosis and to treatment, and sometimes they're intertwined. I was just having a conversation about the sleep testing, which is used both to diagnose and then also as a gateway to different therapeutic options that you may have. So let's start with a poll while folks filter back into the room and people come back and join us online. Eric, if we could have poll number 11. And this one asks about what challenges, top one or two, that you encounter in sticking with your treatment plan. And that could be any of the things we've talked about and other strategies that you might deploy, like Will mentioned, having a sort of menu of options and you pick what you need for certain circumstances. You can do one or two, I think, is the way it's programmed. Top one or two. And I'm going to share some of what we heard from the survey as well. All right, so no surprise, the problems with the equipment itself, comfort, fit, convenience, settings, instruction, rating high on this list and also with our survey population, and right about the same, well, keeps changing. In the survey, it was 50% said uncomfortable and 46% inconvenient. So those are maybe a little higher than what we're seeing here. And I imagine that for most people, they're thinking Cpap or oral appliance with these. Doesn't necessarily restrict it to that specifically. We've heard already today a lot of the challenges with using the machine, keeping update as far as newer models and the access issues that you may encounter. I don't know if everybody has kept their full collection, like Joelle told us she had, of 24 different masks. Anybody top that number over time? And we've heard today about the lack of information or appropriate education, counseling, training, access to knowledgeable folks. For how many people is that in itself been problematic? Just not having the right level of instruction, ongoing support that you need. Certainly something that ASAA and our partners here in the room can think about. How do we fill that gap? That seems like kind of a low-hanging fruit. We talked a little bit about the sort of physical challenges of being, feeling like an octopus is on your face, like getting wrapped up in the hose. We just had a conversation with somebody about, at the break, of different issues that you experience because of the treatment, maybe with more frequent urination at night, some of the issues that kind of go hand in hand with the condition itself. What is a night of sleep like with a Cpap machine or an oral appliance? Tell those of us who haven't experienced that what that feels like. Some of the physical things, in addition to getting the good, positive benefits. What are the downsides?
The downsides are, for most people, I'm sure every one of us has a glass of water beside our bed, because we all have dry mouth, whether we're using full face mask or nasal. When, depending upon what you eat, a lot of us are dealing with some sort of reflux or silent reflux issue. And I'm sure the connection hasn't ever been made, and probably in this room, that when you're not breathing, you're having an obstruction, It's the brain's way of sending a signal to the stomach to shoot up some acid that comes up your airway. And that's actually protecting you. Just like the bedwetting with children and just like getting up to go to the bathroom at night. You're having a biological reaction that's arousing you, telling you to go to the bathroom. Some of the negatives of CPAP, it's hard for me to bash it because without this machine, I'm a dead man. Quite literally. Without electricity, I'm a dead man. I don't know if it's because of evolution, but seeing my daughter, and just to go back a little bit in time, she will bite into an apple and has twice as wide a bite as me at 10 years old than I do at 40 something. And the reason for that is since we caught her early with the early recognition and her bones are still malleable, we could expand the airway. We could eliminate the deviated septum because that top palate's getting flattened out and it's not pushing all the way up. When I first was diagnosed, went and said, okay, I have a deviated septum, let's go get it fixed. Those 2 weeks of post-surgery and having my surgery were the worst 2 weeks of my life. Anybody with any sort of sleep disorder breathing needs to make surgery, in my opinion, a last resort option. You are playing with already a narrow airway, and to go under sedation, you're really playing with fire no matter who you are. It doesn't discriminate. My doctors, everyone, they thought I was manic after it. I was so inflamed, and I was still using my CPAP. They didn't pack my nose. But I knew that I had to wear that CPAP no matter what. And to this day, that I made it through that. You do what you got to do to make this thing work. Whether it's elevating your bed, whether it's putting a fleece over your tube, putting liners. One of our partners is Remzies, who've been great. We send out samples with our CPAP assistance program. There are tricks to the trade. We live with this chronic disease. I wanted to say something earlier. This is the only disease, unlike hypertension and unlike diabetes, that if you're not using your machine for a certain minimum amount of hours, which are arbitrary in itself, and for a certain amount of time, they will literally come back to your house and take that machine out of your house. If you're not using your diabetes medicine, what do you think the reaction is? They don't come and take the diabetes medicine out of your medicine cabinet. They bring you more medicine. They want to make sure you're going to get the treatment. So it's the total reverse antithesis. So this one arbitrary hour of this rule about having to use a machine for 4 hours, so people are wearing it or having other people wear it for them just so they can make sure that someone doesn't take it away from them until they get adjusted to it, is truly insanity. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over, expecting a different result. So, Michelle, you want to say something? Yeah. I've already lost now you can see one of my side effects is ADD.
Sure, just to highlight one good thing. I used to have a respiratory therapist who worked with me, and as soon as I would diagnose somebody with sleep apnea, and we would check the insurance, and he would be in the next room and get them a machine right away. It was a really nice way to practice. It fell apart kind of financially, but it was really nice. And the one thing that I remember Dan telling me was why he loved his job was because the next day after he hooked somebody up with a machine, he would go to their house to see how their night went. And he said time and time again, he heard, "You just gave me my dreams back. I have not had a dream for years." And that was why he stayed in the profession. So I thought that was really cool to be able to tell patients that, you know what, you might get some dreams back. Now a caveat. People still do get up to go to sleep, to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and sometimes that'll happen 3 or 4 hours into having used their PAP therapy. And they may go to the bathroom and say, "I feel really good. Boy, that was awesome. I'm done." And they'll go back to sleep and not put the machine back on. And the problem is that REM blocks happen every 90 minutes, and they get longer and longer as the night goes on. The longest being probably at 5 o'clock in the morning. So that is when people have heart attacks and strokes. So don't be seduced by feeling good because you feel better than you used to. You got to use your therapy, and the most important time to use it is early morning.
Joelle, you were going to...
Wow. Thanks, Dr. Shelley. I haven't dreamed in 30 years. Even with a CPAP machine, I'd love to get my dreams back. Can I have that guy come to my house and do whatever he does? Does it work? Will he fly to Los Angeles? Yeah, he's cute. Oh, that's good. Both Dr. Shelley and Adam brought up something that I want to discuss that's embarrassing but needs to be said, which is let's talk about bladder control and the CPAP machine, because it's been a real issue in my life, because I can't get a good night's sleep if I have to keep disconnecting myself from the machine to go to the bathroom. When I come back and I remember and I'm still functional, I can hook myself all back up, put the mask on, maybe lucky fall enough back to sleep. That's not always the case. Sometimes I reconnect and I'm lying there and I don't fall back. I don't get that REM. I don't get past light sleep into that miracle Peter Pan stuff. And I really want it. I really miss it. I'd like it to come back. Now, it's nice to hear it's saving my life, but I'd rather be asleep, you know. And I just would like to know if there's any more, has there been a correlation? Has there been any study to help relieve me? And I don't want to take medication for it if it's trying to keep me alive, you know. So I'd like to know, anybody else have, comments?
The back.
Quickly, someone just mentioned about having a dry mouth. There's a over-the-counter product available in any drugstore called Biotene. It's next to the mouthwashes, and if you rinse your mouth out with it before you go to sleep, it'll keep your whole mouth moisturized for hours.
The back.
Actually wanted to address the nocturnal, well, it's what we call nocturia, having to go to the restroom all the time. Oftentimes it's a side effect of the apnea itself. When somebody goes through a severe enough desaturation, the heart releases basically it's a hormone, and it is a urinary promoter, diuretic peptide. Okay, so as you're going through your desaturations through the night, more of the ANP is being released. Oftentimes it'll lead to the point where suddenly I have to go to the bathroom 3 hours later. I get up, I go to the restroom. I also blow off all the residual CO2 that my body's accumulated at the same time. I go back to sleep, I start the cycle over again. Urinary frequency during the nighttime is typically an indicator, while on CPAP, that you're not at the right pressure. More often than not, you're not at the right pressure. You may need to be reevaluated. Now, does that necessarily mean that you have to go into the lab? No, not at all. They can oftentimes do this on a rental piece of equipment and get a download. And they can look at that download, they can see where you've stabilized at on an AutoPAP, and then make the readjustment and help correct that piece. Now, something else about dream content. Typically, the most vivid dreamers are the ones whose REM period is the most highly fractured or interrupted. More often than not, you will remember your dream content as you awaken out of REM. So going on CPAP and being well treated on that oftentimes means you're not going to dream. There too is another indicator of proper pressure. So you may want to check with your physician on that, your sleep medicine specialist. Just kind of take a look and see if there's a way to, if you can get a loaner device that can track your time or that can track your pressures. And they're very sophisticated pieces of equipment now, and they can do this. But if you reduce the amount of apnea, the amount of respiratory disturbances during the night, atrial natriuretic peptide release will decrease. And barring any other pathology, your trips to the bathroom should decrease as well. There's a big study in Birmingham, Alabama about that, probably about 20 years ago. And it was actually initiated by a nurse practitioner who was looking at urinary incontinence frequencies inside of nursing homes. She got into the place only to find out they were all apneic. Turned around, got them treated. What do you know? Didn't have the nighttime bedwetting. I hope that helps you.
I want to pull on something you've just talked about, as well as comments that Erin made during her panel conversation about the benefits of having kind of an immediate feedback loop. You've just described a fairly complicated procedure of knowing whether the pressure's right, and the kind of ongoing testing that some people have to go through in order to keep their machine or get a new machine. Erin, you spoke to the benefit of having an app that you could look at every morning and see how well you were benefiting from your CPAP therapy. How many others are also getting sort of that immediate feedback and access to data that helps them make adjustments? Adam, Will, yeah, just.
I can tell you, as having worked previously for one of the manufacturers, in my role, I'm an old sleep tech. I've been doing this more years than I care to remember. But I started a career transition into clinical research probably about 25 years ago. And when we would do the testing of the new CPAP systems, and that didn't matter if it was a tubing, if it was a mask, or if it was the actual device itself, we went through extensive clinical research trials. We would take those units home, oftentimes ourselves, and wear them just to see what that experience was going to be for that patient. I'll use the term loosely, subject, simply so that we knew how to guide them better, so that they were, if they ran into a situation, we could better explain it. But the funny part about it was, I had both sides of that equation on that app. There's an app out there that's for the physician side and one that's for the patient side. And I had access into both of those. It's robust, and it was great information. And if you've got an engaged patient that's willing to use that, your treatment will get better. Now, in her case, with the nighttime situation there, you could take a look at that app and see, do you have a good seal? Are you having any events during the night? What is your mask? Is your pressure fluctuating? That's immediate information right there for you.
Will, can we get a mic over to Will, please?
Yeah, this brings up the subject of data. So I think we're seeing the rise of the patient, or the rise of the participant, if you want to call it that. We don't ever say subject anymore. And I think, when you have a chronic condition like this for 15, 20 years, you deserve to be able to see the data, not just the summary data. You deserve to see all the data, because it might be that you might be a scientist and you put it through your little Vegematic and come up with some conclusions about things. There's summary data on machines and that kind of thing, and that's not too bad, but it's insufficient. I think now, given that the level of sophistication and the level of computer access and that kind of thing are increased so much. A word of caution on data? Yep.
Your chart doesn't belong to you. So if that's something you're interested in, get a hard copy, or get a copy in a format that's readable across universal platform, not just by a certain EMR, because your chart data doesn't actually belong to you. It belongs to the doctor or the clinic. And so if you're like me and you get hit in the area where there's the division between the electronic medical records and the paper medical records, and they choose not to scan some of that over, my MLST that I needed to be diagnosed with narcolepsy no longer exists, and I have no recourse, and they didn't inform me about it. I found out about it by accident. So if you do like having all the data, get a hard copy or get it in a universal format, and that's great, and it's awesome that that data is now available.
I'd add a couple of caveats on top of that. It's not only do are you entitled to your data? It is your data. It is our data, whether it's sleep apnea patients, cardiac patients with pacemakers. You're now seeing a big movement, and the FDA is very well at this with the type 1 diabetes with the hashtag We Are Not Waiting. We don't have 90 days to wait to get to see a clinician to figure out what's going on. This data, this technology, we have to start making work for us. We need to start working with our doctors in a shared decision making. This data that we're looking at is different for each manufacturer. So when we look at it and we're comparing apples to oranges to pears, we're not comparing apples to apples to apples. So the field of sleep medicine has been, I dare say, negligent in that they haven't demanded that these algorithms be publicized and shown to see really what's going on. I know that's not news to what everyone in this room necessarily wants to hear, but we want our data, and right now the DMEs are the stewards of it. And those, we don't know if these DMEs are going to be around for the long term. The spreads are getting smaller, and the business is squinching up. The manufacturers are obviously getting ready to go direct to consumer eventually down the road. And the truth be, with this type of therapy, it is more dangerous to take a pill or drink a glass of wine before you go to sleep than it is to use positive airway pressure. And right now, we are forced, because of the prescription model, that if someone witnesses you having an event, an observed witnessed event, elbows you, you should be able to walk into your drugstore, rent or buy a machine, and try it. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, try something else. That's it.
I don't want to get too deep into the policy issues of OTC medical devices and
And I'll bring it back down to the clinical issue, because I thought that was a really interesting exchange. Both Alan and Shelley, I think, were right. Sorry, I'm a soft talker. Closer. Both Shelley and Alan, I think, were right. One of the key things is, what's the patient hearing? On the one side, if I have dreams, CPAP is working. If I don't have dreams, CPAP is working. So which one is right? They both are, in a sense, right? Because there's good arguments for both. It just depends on how REM is being had that night, and when someone wakes up, and what the reason is for waking up. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because the one big thing we're missing here, and this is to get away from the challenges with the therapeutic devices, is what if we had a way to measure it so we didn't have to take a guess? Instead of a subjective guess as to what was happening, wouldn't it be great if we could measure sleep on a regular basis, or even on an intermittent basis, so we didn't have to guess? We could actually take a look and see what the therapy's doing, how someone's breathing, and how someone's sleeping. So in some of my research projects, what we did, we had the opportunity to do what we called Cpap efficacy studies. So we had this big Cpap adherence intervention program, and we had these medical grade type 3 devices. So we'd send someone home after a month or 2 or 3 with the type 3 device, and they could wear that for 1 or 2 nights. And we could combine the data from the type 3 device on top of the Cpap data and look at it together. So we could see, were there a number of apneas or hypopneas happening that would then result in pressure changes, or we could see whatever we wanted to see. What was missing from that, though, was a measure of sleep. So we didn't have the EEG. Wouldn't it be great if we could do that? So I have a whole lot. I could talk for 30 minutes on consumer technologies, medical grade technologies, and how we should measure sleep in the home environment. But one thing I'll say was, instead of moving away from adding sleep, it was really interesting when someone naturally took PAP off in the middle of the night. We had a night with on PAP and then off of PAP. And we would bring the participant in, take a look and say, this is your brain, this is your sleep on PAP, this is it off of PAP. And talk about motivating, because what you were talking about is you miss those REM episodes late in the morning. And if a lot of people are using CPAP 3 to 4 hours, they might be missing those really important REM episodes. So I'll stop there. So if we could approve some kind of device that could measure sleep and breathing in the home on a regular basis, it would be phenomenal, and I think go a long way.
well, and it also speaks to sort of the need for outcome measures that measure what is a good night of sleep to the patient. And is it having dreams again? Is it feeling rested in the morning, we've heard a lot of different versions of what those important outcomes are, right? Being able to function during the day, not falling asleep at work, not falling asleep at a traffic light or going 60 miles an hour, flying a Navy plane. Oh my God. All important measures, but no uniform way to assess that.
More dangerous and scary right now, Kim, is that we have so many people walking around with these consumer wearables that we all have on our watches or on our wrist, and we think we know as laymen's, because we're a little bit uneducated about what kind of sleep we're getting, literally what stage. And let's be clear, these watches that are measuring actigraphy, they're having a hard time just getting the step count right. So to think that they're taking the next step in measuring stages of sleep, let's be realistic about this. It's not real.
Yeah. One more comment, and then I'm going to move on to the financial issues. Yeah.
Carl, don't mean to steal your thunder here on the wearables, but the thing about wearables, you got to be very, very careful. So few of them have actually gone through FDA level scrutiny clinical trials. They've not gone through true, proper validation and verification through V&V. And it is consumer beware. And you cannot get hooked on looking at these things unless they've actually been through an FDA level trial and think it's going to be correct. Because if you take that into a physician, they're going to consider that as nothing short of going to Dr. Google. Really. Because we really don't have the means to validate something like that in the office. And your comment to that, consumer grade versus medical grade, there is a very substantial difference in there. And those medical grades will have been validated through that process. So just as a precaution, and as having seen it personally myself in my own sleep, and again, knowing what I know about sleep architecture and such, looking at the output on these things and then kind of looking at it from having my own sleep studies done over the years, didn't match a bit. And I mean, it was significantly off. So just grain of salt with any of the units that you use.
And it's not limited to just sleep studies. John Wilbanks, the citizen scientist, data guru who was here with us this morning, did a study, looked at all of the proliferation of apps that you could take a picture of a mole and some kind of algorithm would tell you whether it was cancerous or likely to be cancerous, and it was all over the map. So it's
manufacturers in the medical area are putting out these devices themselves, and they are following with this level of scrutiny.
Yeah.
Those I would have no problem with, but it's, the ones that you can pick up cheap, eBay, no.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. The number 2 challenge was related to financial barriers and a whole wide range of things, and we kind of split that out, anticipating this would be an issue. So Eric, if we could see the next and final polling question, we'll dig into this a little bit more deeply and then talk about some of the things that fall into that bucket of challenges. Can everybody see that? And you get another top 1 to 2 choices on these challenges. We've heard throughout the day how the sleep test, either a home sleep study or an overnight study, can be a gateway point to either getting the diagnosis, getting the right access to an appropriate therapy, to calibrating the therapy, to getting a different model. For how many of you, let's see, where is it? We didn't ask that specifically. Is getting to a sleep study a challenge? Just by a show of hands. Getting in to see somebody. and I would imagine it depends on coverage and policy as to how often that needs to happen, how frequently you have to do that if you're staying on the same therapy or trying to access something new. Coverage for medications, the high out-of-pocket. ASAA tries to tackle this at least on the front end with helping people get access to equipment and renewable supplies. There's information about their Cpap assistance program in your in the booklets that are out on the table, and urge you, if that's an issue you've encountered, to look into that program. And we already had somebody here who had extra machines at home who's going to make those available to the association. What are some of the other issues, Adam?
Some of the other issues, even if you have full insurance, if you have a high deductible or a high premium, it's not even worth going to your insurance company and having them get your resupplies. You know, my insurance will bill us for $40 for a little cotton filter. I can go buy that online for $5, $10. So it's not, most of all my resupplies, I'm out of pocket, even though I have the insurance. So even the insurance standards are just, they're skewed. They're way off.
If you are on Medicaid and Medicare, very often you don't get resupplies. I get mine when I do from my physician at the sleep center. I call, they don't respond. You know, the company that brought the machine, they don't respond. The doctor calls, they don't respond. Well, they tell the doctor, oh yeah, they get the prescription. Yeah, we'll take care of it. You know, you better believe I'm totally convinced that they have charged my Medicaid, Medicare account for those supplies, but those supplies never find their way to my house. Right. They never find their way to my house. And so when I go in for my appointments, you know, I have to tell the doctor, I need a mask, I need a hose, okay? And she digs around in the office for supplies that, you know, Big Pharma brings in, okay? Says, hey, this is the new thing on the market, blah, 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 okay? And sends me home with that so that I have something. And then, of course, she sends the customary prescription out, and nothing ever comes to my house. So that's definitely an issue, okay? That's very real in people's lives, okay? And like I said, I'm convinced every single time she requests, my account is getting charged. I don't see anything. I have no way of proving that either.
Supply
It's
chain
my word
issues.
against the professional company. And you better know they're not believing me. That's just the way it is. So if you're on, you know, limited income, you're just not going to have it if your doctor doesn't happen to have it sitting on the shelf in the office. You're on your own.
As I mentioned in my presentation, I had some trouble after the fact getting my insurance company to pay for the sleep study. And the reason for this, I learned, is that they thought I should have done a home sleep study first instead of being sent into a center first. And I'm not sure where exactly the confusion arose there, if that's something, the way my doctor should have prescribed it. But I think it's kind of terrible. The patient gets stuck in the middle of that argument between, you know, the doctor and the people who provide the sleep study and the insurance company. You know, when you have sleep apnea, you have so many other things going on of, you know, the fatigue and the depression and the tiredness. You're not in a good position mentally to be a strong advocate for yourself and to go out and do a lot of research and learn, oh, I should be doing a home sleep study, or I should be doing this, or I should call the sleep center and follow up and make sure that they cleared this with my insurance before I went there. So, I mean, the very symptoms of this condition make it hard to be a informed consumer ahead of time. And the other thing is that I think it's very ironic that the insurance companies would be resistant to paying for a study when, you know, living with untreated sleep apnea causes so many very serious health conditions that are far more expensive than a sleep study. I mean, if someone goes into the hospital for a stroke or a heart attack or develops type 2 diabetes, it's extremely expensive to treat those things long term. And so I just find it terribly ironic that an insurance company would fight paying for a sleep study when it could save them literally tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in treatment costs down the line. So I wish there was something that could be done about that.
I think one of the consistent things we've heard, and Megan will back this up, I think, across a lot of these patient-focused drug development meetings, is the focus of our healthcare system on an acute care model is really not serving well the more chronic conditions and the things we could do in terms of preventing those more catastrophic long-term consequences of things if they were better addressed on the front end. And
it's like they're operating on the penny wise and pound foolish model. You know, they want you to have the cheaper home version rather than pay for the more expensive one, because they're not thinking about the fact that, you know, if we keep going on the low end, going in, it's going to cost us more in the long run. It's like they don't get it. They're so focused on, I want to save a dime right now. Okay? Never mind the thousands later on that dime is going to cost me. So, I mean, I wonder, are these people educated in these companies?
annual shareholder report, right?
I'd like to touch on the HSTs for just a quick moment. You know, the industry did bring those to bear to help with costs, because we are you know, let's face it, medical costs continue to go up and up and up. Now, HST was brought about for somebody that, you know, if they just had a simple apnea, no other issues, that's who that's really designed for, is for somebody who has straight up sleep apnea. But if they have comorbidities such as diabetes, hypertension, other maladies, any of the, you know, COPD, congestive heart failure, those folks are to be excluded from HSTs. They're actually to go straight to the sleep laboratory. So if there are compounding issues within that patient's health care, they really need to go to the sleep lab. HST is an inappropriate fit because it's just not going to be able to record what's necessary.
Yeah, I think that's a very true statement.
Right. Right. That's right. Over the years, there have been other maladies that have been found during the night, you know, that have further compounded overlap syndromes and such.
Yeah.
So, again, we need to help be able to rein in some costs on these things, but in a responsible way. And that scripting for that HST is only designed to go for somebody who just simply has the given appearance of having OSA. It's not for the narcolepsies. It's not for the periodic limb movements and different things.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the issues that have been raised, particularly in this afternoon session, have demonstrated the importance of forums like this to surface a lot of the day-to-day practical issues and barriers that all of you face in both the process of getting good care and getting good benefit from the treatment options that are available, as well as the need for an expanded array of options that can be deployed strategically to better meet all of the needs that you have. This is a first meeting of its kind for the American Sleep Apnea Association. It surfaced, I think, a lot of opportunities for the association to come in and start to address those gaps, to bring other agencies and policymakers to the table to try to address the myriad needs that are out there that are unmet in the community. And I know it's been a rich and informative discussion for certainly the members of the board that are here today.